Coming up this week on the Markcast, well, it looks like CFL is back on the menu, boys. We have Jim Mullin, President of Football Canada, on the show, breaking news analysis as Dave Naylor tweeted out the ratification of the CBA from the CFLPA.
If I'm looking at this as a CFL fan, which I am, I'm happy that they're back playing football again. If I look at it from the perspective of being involved in Canadian football, as I am, I'm not necessarily happy with what they've done with the ratio.
Then we have your regularly scheduled programming. We have longtime friend of the show, Darrell Davis, coming on, talking about the CFLPA, why it was necessary to kind of get to this breaking point to get this new deal through.
I think the scary thing is, and I was worried about that right from the start, Reed, is that they're slowly trying to continue pulling Canadians out of play. And I think that's what really terrified the players union, knowing, especially if they do it for 7 years, in 7 years, they're going to take out more players.
And then plenty of USFL content. We are previewing week 7. We have Eric Eager of PFF.
Yeah, I get worried because, the finals are end of June. Like, a player would almost have to stop playing for their USFL team and sign almost immediately to play with an NFL team so if you're trying to be a feeder league, maybe that's not the right thing.
And then I have a great conversation with Cody of Establish the Run, all about his thoughts of the USFL season thus far.
I think that they could do so much more to engage and connect with your style of audience that just loves spring football, loves alternate football, and fans like that just want to have a different product to watch. Maybe we're, not as engaged with the NFL or not as engaged with college football, or just want to have a new rooting interest. And then people like me who, are mostly in this for the sports betting, mostly in this for daily fantasy and things like that.
Big week next week, crazy XFL stuff. Should be a good one. Take care. Well, a big double congrats to the CFL for getting the CBA ratified tonight. Dave Naylor just tweeted out, we are live, breaking, reaction here. I have Football Canada President Jim Mullin on. I'll plug the show here and we'll get into, but off the top, Jim, how are you feeling about everything?
Maybe triple congrats. That was a great reference. That was a great inside CFL media reference that you just pulled off there.
So Jim was we were on last week. We tried to do this last week. Of course, the deal fell through and all that. So now we are here. The Dave Naylor tweeted as of 3 minutes ago. They've ratified the new CBA. Great show coming up. Jim, we're going to get his thoughts here breaking off the top as you listen to this Friday morning. I have a really fired up Darrell Davis interview coming up as well. Darrell was great. I saw Jim retweeted the promo already. Darrell was great talking about, why this was needed to kind of protect the Canadianness of the CFL. Jim, you'll really appreciate that. And then we have lots of USFL talk today. We have Eric Eager of PFF coming on. And then we have Cody of Establish the Run. So lots of CFL stuff here off the top. It's not every day that we ratify a new CBA. And then we'll have all of your USFL stuff. And then a big XFL week next week. We're anticipating the cities and logos and team names and all that. Look for a live stream from me kind of when that all comes down. But I have a big XFL guest for next week as well. Jim, are you excited about the XFL teams?
I am excited about the XFL teams, and I'm excited to see what towns they operate out of, where they land, and after the rebrand, I'm interested to see if they rebrand the old brand, at least the 2.0 brand in some of these towns.
Yeah. So Jim's going to ride with me here. We'll get his thoughts on all this, and then we'll kick back into the rest of the program. But I just figured off the top here, we'll do all this stuff as opposed to yilly-yag around and then get Jim on. So, Jim, we've just ratified, was all this work done just for an extra $250,000 and a ratifying bonus?
Well, I do think it helped usher it in. I do think that it did come down to the ratio and how the ratio was going to be managed. If I'm looking at this as a CFL fan, which I am, I'm happy that they're back playing football again. If I look at it from the perspective of being involved in Canadian football, as I am, I'm not necessarily happy with what they've done with the ratio. If I'm looking at it as a communications professional, I see this 49-51% thing becoming an ongoing pain that's going to be hard to manage. It's the message that's going to come out through this on a week-to-week basis and how it's described and how it's talked about is going to take away from the product. The two people that I want to be talking about in this market aren't going to be the naturalized American and the Canadian going in and out of the game. It's going to be the two quarterbacks the BC Lions have, which are two great Canadian quarterbacks. Let's get back to that discussion rather than getting into this discussion week after week, which inevitably we will.
Hey guys, Future Read here. Just a quick clarification. While Jim and I were recording his section, we kind of had the breaking news here analyzing the CBA ratification. The teams are going to be required to start 8 national players in 2023. That's up from the 7 in 2022. One of those players can be a nationalized American, defined as a player who has spent a minimum of 3 years in the same city or 5 in the league. Jim mentioned 7 and not 8, which is when the initial report came out. So Jim just wanted to make sure we clarify that. Jim thinks that's slightly better, increasing to 8 in 2023. Jim wishes it was 7 plus 3 with the nationalized Americans and not taking that spot there with that. So I just wanted to add that in. Again, really appreciate Jim coming on and all the breaking news stuff. Okay, back to the show. It just seems messy. It just seems like a really weird, like only in the CFL kind of thing that we're going to have this, right? So people, if we're catching up, we have USFL fans, whatever. The big sticking points were they wanted $1 million ratifying bonus, the CFLPA, that's divided out among the members. Darrell and I talk about this as well. I think it's like $1,500, bucks, I assume Canadian, right, per member. They added $250,000 to that. So, what does that add another? So 2,000 per person, right? Are we doing the math on that?
Yeah. Like Geddy Lee said with Bob and Doug, $10 is $10, eh?
Well, so we held that up. So we got that they are going to remove that from salary caps here in the future, right? In the 2027. Right. So
it's borrowing from tomorrow to pay for today,
which I don't like because the players that are getting paid today are not going to be in the league by and large in 2027.
Of course. Yeah, of course. That's the average and the way it works out. I will say this about the Canadian players originally, and some of the American players had to join in on this too. Originally rejecting the first ratio pitch that was being made, that was agreed to by both bargaining parties. That was at least a move where they were looking at tomorrow. They were paying it forward in that moment. I'm not sure if the money that came forward exactly is paying it forward. It's actually the opposite. So
we're getting that, and then we're getting the ratio thing. This was from whatever they proposed before, right? The league had proposed this weird. You get the 2, and it's 49%, right? I mean, that didn't change. Really, only the ratification actually has gone from the previous one that was submitted, right?
Yeah, my understanding at this hour is before you could get a naturalized American in as a non-import. So you could play 6 Canadians and a naturalized American or a Canadian. That's been taken away, and now you have 2 positions that are 51-49, right? Instead, so it's going to be interesting in an era where we're going into sports betting in this country. Having this other random quantity that is open to abuse by coaches is going to be frustrating for bettors, in my opinion. It's one part out of many parts of the game, but it's still frustrating at the same time.
What would you have preferred to see them do with that tweak or untweak that, or what would you like to see?
Well, as I mentioned with being an administrator in amateur football in Canada, I would have preferred just a very simple, straightforward, keep the line at 7. Personally, I think more Canadians should play in the Canadian Football League. I'm on the record of saying that, but keep it at 7 and add to naturalized Americans. The ability to, from the CFL's perspective in bargaining, to combine these two together was, in my opinion, a masterstroke of bargaining. It was really smart on their part, because it created the possibility for some division in the Players Association, and when really these two types of players are very different. They both of these kinds of players do create continuity in these teams, which is important. The Canadians have always brought continuity, and I think we've struggled, well, for 40 years to find a way to create continuity with some of the older players. So I think there was a place for both of them. I just don't think it was in the same category. I think you could have easily gone with two categories on this and manage this, especially at a time when the CFL is going to be competing with two other leagues, three other leagues, if you want to call the NFL competing with the NFL, to grant that status to import players, whether naturalized Americans or naturalized Canadians, and have that continuity and have that bonus for service, is going to get them through a period where the USFL drops off, or the XFL after 2 or 3 years decides to pull the plug, or gets even stronger, right? Who knows? Who knows what the future is? The one thing that I do know is, if I want to go back in the history books, back to 1985, the BC Lions won the Grey Cup that year. At that time, you had to start 10 Canadian players. There were 5 games in that season where the Lions started 11 Canadian players. One of the reasons why was that the USFL was at its peak. It was in its last year. It had drawn import talent out, and the Canadians that they had were better than the Americans that they could bring in, and they could win a championship with that Canadian strength. So it would not surprise me, as we go down this path with other competing spring leagues tying up players, that some of these CFL teams are going to be playing more than just the 5 plus half players in their lineups as starters.
Yeah, I mean, Darrell and I got into that today as well, that and obviously you'll hear it coming up, that you should be incentivizing the Canadian talent and holding on to that, because if USFL exists in 2-3 years, if XFL, it's impossible for the CFL to compete for those entry level positions of, well, I can just stay in Seattle, or I can stay in LA, or I can stay in whatever. I don't have to go up and live in Winnipeg for 6 months. They're not going to win that battle. So why not steer into the Canadianness of it? Not to shun the Americans, but like you said, why not add a roster spot there?
Well, and I think I said it the last time I was on your show. It's going to be difficult, even if a CFL team can offer $10,000 to $15,000 more, versus somebody staying home. That's staying in your home country has some power to it, especially when we're talking about football, especially when we're talking about football tied into American networks, where friends and family can more easily see you, where it's not a foreign property. I think the CFL, if the XFL is successful, and especially if the USFL hangs around, is going to be forced to lean into Canadian talent. And it's, at the end of the day, I don't think it's going to hurt the product.
What this says to me is that this was far more about money, though, for the players this go around than we pushed off another week to get an extra $500. It didn't, they made no concessions at all on the ratio. It felt like it was all about the money on this.
Well, it's a bit of ratio juggling, I think. But, when it comes down to negotiations like this, for both parties, it was just about the money. Come on, man! That's what drives this thing. We can talk about player development. We can talk about grassroots. We can talk about the fans. We can talk about all these secondary things around it. But at the end of the day, follow the money, and that's going to give you the answer when it comes down to labor negotiations. I will say, though, that it's a big plus. And I think I said this on your show the last time I was on here too, that the health benefits that were established, especially for the American athletes for that 5-year period, huge plus. And having an active union that is at least looks like it's going to work in concert with the league is also a plus, because I think that's something that the XFL and the USFL can't offer, that the CFL can. You got a union up here that to one degree or another will have your back, whereas probably on the other side of the line, it's a little more everybody's a free agent.
Well, it's hard, yeah. And I know Kenneth Farrow, friend of the show, they're trying to do that, right? They're working towards that with the steelworkers here. But yeah, you have all of this pageantry, all the foundations, everything set up to kind of facilitate all this stuff in the way that you don't have in the USFL at all.
Yeah, and at least there's a history here with the CFLPA. There's a long history. It's established. It's not going away. I am happy that the CFL and its owners at this particular juncture did not take the hardest line possible, because they could have. Breaking the union right now would not be a wise move in the eyes of some of the fans and some of the base in this case. Look, a lot of people have talked about the relevancy of the CFL in some of the larger markets, about the damage that this has done. Once they start playing games, we're just getting into the exhibition season right now, the preseason. Once we get into the regular season, most of this is going to be forgotten, outside of the 51-49 thing that I think is going to be an ongoing debate, which, I hope is managed well, but I have my doubts. Most of it will be forgotten. We'll be back to playing football again. And that's really, at the end of the day, the thing we all wanted.
So overall, to kind of round this out before I let you go, because I appreciate you hopping on here late to do all this. We feel good. Preseason, it seems like, are they going to be able to get the games in this weekend, right? I know that Toronto, right? They had canceled some flights, but they're going to get everything. It seems like all is forgiven here.
Yeah, I think it robs a little bit of momentum in this first week of the preseason, but like the funny thing about preseason football, and I think people know this, whether you're an NFL fan or a CFL fan, you get about 5 or 6 weeks into the season, you forget that it ever existed. so let's not get into a knot about how some of these preseason games came off. It's just good that we're looking at a full 18-game season with normal playoffs and a normal Grey Cup at a normal date. And maybe we can start talking about Michael O'Connor and Nathan Rourke as quarterbacks of the BC Lions rather than talking about mixing and matching ratios.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate it. I'm glad we could get you on here. Like I said, we were trying to do this last week, but they got the extra $500. But I'm glad they got this. It was getting to the point of messy. I know I had fans messaging me today and really upset about everything. So I'm glad that we can get forward with this, because I do think they were kind of starting to lose the public perception battle with the fans, the players, where that is.
Well, I you know what? I looked at some of the reactions on Twitter after the players rejected in a vote what was handed down to them by their bargaining unit, and quite frankly, I was embarrassed for a lot of people in the way they reacted. It was not a good look on them, quite frankly, in terms of the way they, and some people in professional positions. Directing anger at the players because of this. I understand that people get frustrated, right? I understand that, and collective bargaining, it can be messy at times. But players standing up for their own jobs, come on, man. And it's not like we're talking millions and millions of dollars here. Like, some of these players have the opportunity because they've gone to a Canadian school and they've graduated, or some of them have, like Daniel Adeboboye, he got his degree, long before he needed to, while he was still playing. Like, there's other examples of that where they could go and follow their educational path and make more money. This isn't about greed, folks. This is about having the opportunity to play the game they love. Right.
Yeah,
if it's about millions of dollars, like that's for that other league.
Well, no, I tweet out, you never forget the players are the product. I mean, everything else aside, we watch these, whether it's football or hockey or anything, the players are the product. That's what we watch no matter what league it is. And you can never forget that. I don't care that, you feel like you buy the tickets for the CFL games and it's community owned. And I certainly appreciate all that. But the players are the ones that is the product that we are watching on the field.
Well, yeah. And from the amateur perspective here, from university and junior and all of that, like, we're about the athlete. So don't be surprised if we're very athlete centric in the way that we approach issues. Like when I openly talked on Twitter about, hey, here's a solution, Canadian players in each position group. I'm thinking about that through the lens of, this is great for development. This is great for all different types of athletes that can pursue this, that, and the other thing. That's not a plan that necessarily works for the Players Association, and it's not something that necessarily works for the CFL. But in terms of that missing element, that third element that I think is key for growing the game in this country, it's important now that after this business portion has been put to bed, that we start talking about developing the game in Canada in a holistic fashion, right? That we start talking about the ecosystem of the game, because it's taken a lot of knocks through this process, and it's time to get everybody back at the table working on the game as a whole.
Well, there you go. I am glad we got you on. I think this is a good spot. We don't double dip a lot, but I think that this was good to get you on because we kind of had the poo-poo last week where we had to kind of like, what did we do? We kind of ho and hummed for a little bit. But anything else before I let you go? Like I said, I really appreciate you coming on tonight and doing this after the big breaking news.
Well, I think I may have brought this up on the last time I was here. I think this is like SNL, and I'm in the 5-timer club, and I should have a big velvet jacket with a Markcast X sent up to me, and a nice purple velour that kind of matches the red and the blue together would be very much appreciated in the mail.
That's good. I am pontificating on a logo change. I haven't decided yet if we're going that route. Obviously, keeping the Markcast, but we'll see. Because like the XFL, and then you post in that it's not the real logo anymore, but you post and you still get. So I have a designer working on it. I haven't decided yet if we're going that route. I might put it up to a public vote. Yeah,
I think it's a great idea to put it out to a vote. But I think at the end of the day, just the idea of a logo change. But you have to have a reveal. It has to be developed by you and not developed by a committee. Don't develop it by a committee.
Yeah, that was the Victor Queen, right? That was the Victor Queen saying, right?
Yeah.
Well, there we go. Big, like I said, big double congrats. That brought joy to my life today so much. The online Twitter banter today was very happy to wake up to. That was very funny between a lot of the CFL media. A lot of pressure, a lot of high pressure stakes right now. I understand that, but it was funny to laugh along.
Well, and I offered to buy everybody in the media circle that were chastising me about saying, "Hey, everybody, calm down. They'll have this figured out by the end of the week." A beer online. Like I was willing to send money transfers out to them so they could buy beer at their favorite bars. I don't see anyone coming back to me and sending me a 6-pack.
Well, I know. Well, we're getting late here. I imagine it's like Scotch time for you. What is the late night? What is the nightcap? What is the Jim Mullin nightcap? Like a Scotch? Are you a gin guy?
Sailor Jerry and Coke.
There you go. Well, we're going to let Jim go have his Sailor Jerry and Coke. We're going to toss it to Darrell Davis. We'll go to Eric Eager, and then we'll go Cody Main. I'll be back at the end of the show. We're talking the XFL. I got some XFL TV deal thoughts and then plugging our stuff for next week. So thank you so much again, Jim Mullin, for coming on. Well, I really just want to sit and talk about Dave Naylor dunking on Justin Dunk on Twitter, but I think we will talk about the CFL strike today. How are you doing, Darrell Davis?
Okay, and double congrats on all of these things, right?
Well, this is interesting. So we're kind of in the same predicament we were last week where, we had Jim Mullin on and we're talking, the vote is going to be tonight or, they're potentially the deadline, right, to go to the vote. But I want to focus more on kind of the existential, right, conversation here versus because you're with me. I don't think the season as a whole is any kind of jeopardy, right?
It can't be. They both sides know that. The preseason might be in jeopardy, but the regular season won't be. They've gone through that and realized that they're in financial turmoil, and if they were to cancel or lose any games, they're in big, big trouble.
Perfect. So moving forward, so like I said, so whether they decide to vote on it today, we move to next week, right? It's come now. It felt like last week the sentiment was very much on the CFL players, right? Okay, they need to get what they need to get, right? Let's stand by them. Now it seems like that soured a little bit on them, and it's more like, hey, like, what are you guys hoping to get out of this? Am I reading the room right up there?
Oh, yeah. It's totally changed, hasn't it? It was all on the owners before that they were trying to manhandle the players, and so they hammered out an agreement, and everybody thought, oh, terrific, good for the players for doing that. What do you mean? The players turned it down? The fans are furious because they're blaming the players now for turning down what they thought was an okay offer. But the okay offer obviously didn't pass muster with with all the players in the CFL.
Did you think it was a good deal?
I thought it was okay. Both sides are going to be upset. That's the way labor negotiations work. You're not going to get everything you need. It looked like they had kind of left the ratio alone a little bit. I know they were tinkering with it, but I think the scary thing is, and I was worried about that right from the start, Reed, is that they're slowly trying to continue pulling Canadians out of play. And I think that's what really terrified the players union, knowing, especially if they do it for 7 years, in 7 years, they're going to take out more players. So they're making a stand for the future. And when I looked at it a little closer, I thought, you know what? Good for the players for standing up for this one.
Because I'm in the Facebooks and Twitter, and obviously that's a small portion of whatever, but I see a lot of so you're sacrificing, you're risking sacrificing the league for a roster spot.
Mm-hmm. It's not a roster spot. Sorry about that. I think it's going to be a whole bunch of roster spots, and that's why they're doing it. It's not just over the years. It's gone from 14 players to 11 players to 10 to 7 starters, and it just gets smaller and smaller. And if they don't make a stand now, Reed, they'll never be able to make a stand. Last year, and it's when you think about logically in terms of numbers, 45 players on an active roster last year, right? 21 of them have to be Canadian. So technically, they're not the majority anymore. But with 21 and a lot of the returnees and everything, there's some Americans who don't vote. There's a lot of Americans who don't come back. This might be the last year that the Canadians have enough authority in the Players Association voting to hang on to those Canadian spots. And I think they took a stand when they absolutely had to. So it's not just, in my mind, not just one spot they're saving spots down the road.
Well, and I wanted to have you on anyway, and I did see your tweet about that this is, because once you lock in, like you said, if we're diminishing every single time, whether it's, 5 years from now or 10 years, those numbers are going to keep going down.
Yep. And that's what they've been doing over the years. They continue to say that Canadians are too expensive. There aren't enough of them. There are good frontliners, but they don't have enough depth. They've been saying this for 40 years, Reed. Every general manager and every coach thinks that way. My argument all the time is, whenever you let the general managers and the coaches make the rules, they're going to ruin the game. So let somebody else make the rules for them and then let them play by those rules, because they're always looking for ways to wiggle around it. The coaches and players have always thought the Canadians are inferior. Most of the coaches and GMs are American. They realize that there's a never-ending supply of American talent. There isn't that never-ending supply of Canadian talent, but there's more and more Canadians. So why don't you go the other way and add more Canadians to the roster as opposed to taking them away from the roster?
Well, and I would argue with that too, that, and we can have this conversation next year and see how the USFL is doing and the XFL. But I mean, there are going to be alternative places for Americans, right? That, even if the pay is not as great or it's similar, not having to travel and do the whole thing for 6 months out of the year. I would agree, let's bolster the Canadian presence of it, knowing that this, like you said, never-ending supply of American talent could potentially start being inhibited here in the coming years. This is a way to kind of counter Alex that.
You're right. They're diluting it, right? Because as you say, USFL, XFL, all these other, the fan-controlled league, whatever that one is, right? There's little places for players to go And they don't have to cross the border. They don't have to put up with the weaker Canadian dollar. They don't have to pay taxes in 2 countries and all those things that go on. 2 residences, right? There's so many things that the players have to deal with coming up to Canada. And as you said, and it's such a great point, that there are going to be fewer top-level players available. It's going to dilute the talent. So to balance that out, it should be the other way around. You make a great point. Why not fill it with Canadians as opposed to Americans? And I'm not saying there's no place for Americans in the league. Not a chance. The history of this league is full of great American players, as it should be, because they really bolster the game. But every other league, when you go to Switzerland and Austria and for hockey, and you go to Britain and all those places for soccer, they have to have so many nationals on their team. Why is it bad for the CFL to have a rule like that? It isn't bad. So let's take advantage of the great Canadians who are playing, and maybe the Americans who aren't coming up here. Those roster spots can be filled by better, more talented Canadian players.
It's just hard because like this, and obviously it's so much more nuanced the conversation, right? I mean, this is why it's nice having podcasts like this where we can kind of talk about it, because I don't think that message is making its way to, I sense very sourness, like we said before, with most of the fans right now following this league.
Well, the fans always think they own this league, right? That's part of the beauty. And a lot of times they own the team anyway, right? There's so many community-owned teams, right? In Winnipeg and Edmonton and Saskatchewan. So the fans really get bitter because they figure it's being taken away from them. They're not doing this for the fans. You can say the fans are the lifeblood of any league, and maybe that's true, maybe more so in the Canadian Football League. But if you don't take a stand sometime, you're not going to have any football for the fans, right? There's been this is the first labor stoppage since 1974 in the Canadian Football League. The players have always given in. They don't have to give in anymore. The fans aren't used to that, and they always say, oh, well, you can't have my money. I'm canceling my season tickets. Go ahead, blah, 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 blah. They all come back eventually. And if they don't, well, you were never that serious about it, in my mind. So go ahead. Cheer for the players. It's a great, exciting product. And let's see if they can hammer something out that makes it even more exciting.
Why do you think it's now and not any time in the last however many years, since 74 that this is going on? Is it, because of COVID and the year off and the reduced last year? I mean, why is it now?
A little bit of all of that. I still harken back to the point that you and I talked about me earlier in terms of the numbers that they saw. I really think that the Canadian players in particular, the whole Players Association used to comprise completely Canadian players almost. Now there's Americans. Solomon Elamimian is the president. He's an American. And I think the Canadians are starting to realize we've got to hold on to our Canadian talent. And they were when they do the numbers and you really think about it, they're starting to lose that power to do that. And as they continue to weed out, as you say, 1 player a year, 1 player in 7 years, then all of a sudden the Canadians won't have that power anymore. And I really believe that right now they realize this is our last chance to take a stand, and that's why we have to do it now.
It's interesting. I mean, I think it's possibly the worst thing that the CFL could have right now heading into the season, just especially after coming off of last year and just it was kind of a pissy season, right? I mean, the gameplay, and I was hoping, like, I got to talk about this every week. I would do anything, like get them a full training camp, get them a full everything. Let's get this going here and not be worried about it.
Yeah, players don't like training camps. The veterans don't, right? The veterans don't especially like preseason games. They don't get paid a whole lot of money. When you see how little they get paid, $400, $500, $600 a week for the preseason, rookies don't get anything. Rookies don't even get the vote on this, right? Rookies in the collective bargaining agreement do not have to be paid a dime during training camp, as long as the team pays their expenses. So it's a bad deal for a lot of players. They need a little bit more money. They need a little bit more job security. I'm not always on the player's side or the worker's side in labor negotiations. Sometimes I take the other side, but this one for sure, I'm very proud of the players, especially the Canadian guys who are standing up to the bullies like Simone Lawrence of the Hamilton Tiger Cats, who says, hey, if the Canadians don't want to play, let's go get more guys out of college. To hell with you, Simone Lawrence. Get the heck out of here. They've given you a chance to play, and now you're bad-mouthing them. Forget it. That's ridiculous. The split is caused by guys like Simone Lawrence, and I think that's horrible that they're dividing the locker rooms even more.
A divide between American and Canadians?
Yes. Yeah. There's always been a bit of a split. And you can see it when good college players come up here and you talk to them and then they say, I think I'm the best player at this position. And you say to them, well, yeah, but there's a Canadian in there too. And they want to play a Canadian there. And the rookies go, what do you mean? Well, he's Canadian. They have to have 7 Canadian starters. You mean I'm going to lose my job to a Canadian who's not as good? Maybe. that Canadian will get better and will hopefully turn into a player, maybe turn into a legend, into a Hall of Famer. But there's been that split forever and ever because you come up thinking, I'm better than this guy. Players know where you rank. When you look things over, they can tell who the best players are, right? And if you lose that job, even though you're better and you lose it because of the Canadian ratio, you're bitter and angry about it. And I think that they have to stop doing that and make sure that they explain it a little bit better, at least to the rookies who are coming up here and saying, listen, we have to have so many Canadians. It's not your fault. You're a good American player, but we need to fit our roster into the ratio.
It's hard. And I mean, I have gotten in trouble with stuff I've said in the past. I don't think the Canadian Football League does itself any favor sometimes in like, it's our league and it's our thing. And I understand the other side of that. And we have pride in everything and it gives everybody ownership. But it is I had to, literally fight with a hammer with walls to even be able to like talk about this stuff. It's challenging. So I could see players like, God, I've worked my whole life and I come up here and like, it's not fair. I understand why they do the ratio and all that. But I mean, I would be better too. Let me just say that.
True. But you know what? If they stop doing it, if you didn't protect a few jobs, then I always worry about grassroots football, right? The greatest players in Saskatchewan Roughriders history, the two of them are Ron Lancaster, George Reed, Americans, but the next two are probably Canadian offensive linemen and Roger Aldag and Gene Mikowski, Canadian players who might not have even had a chance to play in this league if there wasn't a ratio. So you need to have the ratio. You need to protect it because there are players who are developing somewhere along the line because they want to play for the Saskatchewan Roughriders or Canada's team, the BC Lions, America's team, the BC Lions, right? So as you've declared them so often, there are kids who want to grow up and do that. And I think that you better provide that opportunity for them. Otherwise, you might lose football to other sports, soccer, hockey, whatever other sports there are available.
It's interesting. So we're talking, the roster, right? You're protecting now, right? Trying to protect the future at this point. But then I'm reading too about them trying to get a ratification bonus, right? And be able to get a bonus now and kind of borrowing from down the line. So it seems like they also then we want money now because we haven't been paid the last, we're at 60% of pay the last 2 years.
Yeah, but the ratification bonus is going to work out to about $1,500 per player. And if you've ever been in a union, which I was for a while, you say, oh, the ratification bonus, okay, we didn't get a whole lot, but at least I got another $1,000 in my pocket or something. Come on, you guys. You're selling out the league for $1,500. And you make a very good point too, Reed, that it's money that's coming from future salary caps. So the $1 million that they're going to use for the ratification is going to come from the players in the future. They don't care about that right now because they want to get paid now. And if I'm not playing in 2 years, well, it doesn't matter to me that I'm not going to get a raise. So it's a weird thing. So I think that they should pass on the ratification bonus, let their salaries go up a little bit as they are, and take the 7 Canadians and hang on to that as tightly as you can, and let's move on. The weird thing to me, then, we've talked about this on a few of our radio shows around here, Reed. A week ago, it was okay for the CFL to say, okay, 7 Canadians, that's good. And then they come back with their counteroffer and say, no, 6 Canadians. What the heck? You agreed to 7 earlier. Why are you taking that back? Because you're playing bully, and you can't play bully in a game like this.
You mean the league is saying that?
The league is saying that back to the players, right? And, a week ago they had said in their initial offer, yeah, we can handle 7 Canadians. But now when they came back with the take it or leave it, the final offer once again, it's down to 6. So they're playing hardball. And I realize you have to in labor negotiations, but it was something you gave in on a week ago. Why wouldn't you give in on it now?
Do you think Ambrosi is doing enough to kind of help mediate this?
No, what his statements the other day, he's got to be the bad guy, but he's not really involved in the negotiations. But he's got to come out and say it. This is our final offer, because that way it looks united. People are blaming Randy Ambrosi for the negotiations. He had very little to do with it, but he's just a mouthpiece, a spokesperson for the owners, which has always been a bit of point of contention for the Canadian Football League, right? When you look at the NFL, Goodell and Roselle and all those guys spoke the way they wanted to, and the owners fell in line behind them. It's the other way around in the Canadian Football League. The commissioner has to step in line with the owners. So he's taking heat, but he's got to come out and say, okay, this is it. This is our last offer, and stand up there and pretend that he's the tough guy. And it puts him in a bad light. And I don't think they're handling it right. You can always say it's the last offer. It's never the final offer.
It is interesting because in NFL world this week, they're trying to work on hiring minorities and outside candidates. And so they did this they had the spring meeting and they brought in a bunch of candidates that wouldn't normally get talks. And they said to the owners, you need to come in and talk with these, guys and girls and kind of get to know them potentially to move them up. And it was one of those things where the owners didn't have an option, right? It was you need to come here. You need to make yourself available. You need to do this. They didn't have a choice to not. And like you said, it's very interesting when you look at how the dynamics of the two leagues, it's very different.
Well, true. And that's the way it is in the NFL. There's one owner, right? Every team, they're not owned by corporations. You can't be like the Toronto Argonauts and owned by several people or by several corporations. You have to, the NFL, it's one guy. It's Jerry Jones, right? It's Robert Kraft. They're the ones responsible. It's their money. They make the decisions. And that's why they operate that way, because it's one person. It's like the commissioner, one person. He talks to the owners before he makes a decision. Of course he does. But then when it's decided, this is what we're doing, they all fall in line behind the commissioner. And that's one of the reasons why the NFL, in my mind, why the NFL is so successful and the CFL is always floundering, because they don't have one person in charge. It's not a democracy sometimes. It has to be a dictatorship. One of my favorite coaches, Don Matthews, used to say that when he was coaching the teams. Says, this is not a democracy, it's a dictatorship, and I'm the head dick. And it made a lot of sense because you're in charge. You're the boss. And that's the way it works in the NFL with every franchise and with the league itself. And I think that's a real falling down point for the Canadian Football League, that it doesn't operate that way.
Do you think, we move along here, right? We pass it today, we pass it next week, we lose 2 or 3 preseason games. I even had one of our listeners, longtime CFL guy, messaging me today. He's like, I'm so done with this. I'm not posting about anything. Are we apathetic now towards this?
I don't think so. You talked earlier about how the fans are responding. They're not apathetic at all. They feel something important is being taken away from them. And that's the beauty. I tease the fans about how they think they own the place, but they also are passionate about the game. And even when you talk about markets that you think nobody cares about in Vancouver and Toronto, Montreal, there are people who love the Argonauts and the Alouettes and the Lions everywhere in those centers all the time. And they do care about it. I don't think it's apathetic. I think it's a lot of anger. But who do you throw it at? It seems like they're throwing that anger, as you noted earlier, at the players. But they just want football, as we all do. We want it to go back to normal. After the pandemic, we're looking for everything to go back to normal. Reed and football, Canadian Football League, 18 games with a Grey Cup in Regina, beautiful, snowy, cold Regina. Bring your long johns. We'll see you in November. That means that things are back to normal.
I am very scared for I had to tell Dorothy, I said, I think it's going to be significantly colder than it was in Hamilton. I really have.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. It will be. Absolutely. Ask your buddy, Jordan Eberle. Say hi to Jordan for me, okay? From your favorite Seattle Kraken team. Ask him what it's like, because he grew up 4 houses away from me on down my street. We played street hockey for a long time in Regina. So ask him what it's going to be like in Regina in November.
That's right. No, we have our Kraken season ticket side. We're like the Eberle. My friend Paul Williams is a big boisterous man, and we get a lot of, because it's quiet at the Kraken game sometimes. You get a lot of booming Eberle chants going on. So we're doing our part.
As you should. He's a great guy. He wrote the foreword for the book I wrote about NHL players from Saskatchewan. Jordan wrote it for me because we're old family friends. His younger brother and my younger son are best buddies. So. We go way, way back, and it's always good to see. It makes me cheer for the Kraken. I'm a Detroit Red Wings fan, but I do cheer for the Kraken because of Jordan Eberle.
Well, we might need to, off mic, we might need to arrange a meeting here between Paul Williams and Jordan Eberle. That might be exciting. Getting back to this, so, the CFL, the people on the league side that are negotiating, right, former players, right, Wade Miller, and the other one is, I'm lacking right now. It's Wade
Scott
Miller.
Mitchell.
That's right. So, should they be, it seems like they should be more empathetic, right, to the players. So, obviously we're trying to labor negotiate here, but it seems like as people, they've got roles, with the Canadian ratio and all that they should be more inclined to work on that.
They're business guys, and right, Scott Mitchell's bought a share in the Hamilton Tiger Cats, and Wade Miller has business profits quite a bit from his other businesses, profit quite a bit from their operations with the Winnipeg Blue Bombers. So they're trying to get a good business deal in place. They don't care as a lot of companies don't, what happens to the players. They just want the players to give in so that they can get more profit out of it. And, that's the way it operates. It's unfortunate, but the CFL has to operate that way. Don't have any problem with them running it like a business. We've said so often, the league's rules and all these other things are pretty good. How do you operate as a business? That's where they've always fallen down. And now they're trying to operate like a business. And I think they are, as you point out, a little bit heavy-handed. But most companies seem to be a little bit heavy-handed. Wade Miller was a scrappy player who didn't have a lot of talent but worked really hard when he was on the ice. Scott Mitchell knows the game from his father, Doug Mitchell, who was a longtime commissioner of the Canadian Football League. So they understand the inner workings of the game. And I think that they realize what they realize the most is that the players have always given in and are probably going to give in a little bit more again. And I think that's maybe unfortunate, but you always use tactics and your advantages when you are negotiating. So they're doing what they have to do. There are other people involved in the negotiating committee. Greg Dick from the CFL office, who leads us in our Canadian Football Hall of Fame discussions, is also involved in that. So they've got the numbers all figured out. But you're right; they know it from a lot of different angles, and still realize that they probably still have sway when it comes to the voting.
Well, I mean, I think the very fact that the players are still practicing right now and on the field, right, doing training camp says. I mean, I don't think that is the best look for I think it's good for them because I want them to be in game shape when we figure all this out and move forward. But it certainly doesn't look like, we're holding firm here that we're not going to, that we're going to keep our end of the bargain or whatever.
True. But then when all of a sudden the owners say, you know what, we have too much uncertainty in terms of our scheduling, we might lock you out. So that's probably what's coming next. Some of the teams are practicing, but the Edmonton Elks and the Toronto Argonauts both canceled their flights today to go to Ottawa and Winnipeg for preseason games. The Saskatchewan Roughriders canceled today's practices. They called it a recovery day, which I understand, and let the players meet, I guess. But maybe there's a little bit at play here. There's so many other things going behind the scenes, Reed, that we hear a lot about a lot of things, but there are other things on the go that we're not aware of. So how this happens, flip a coin, right? We thought by now we'd be talking about the upcoming games, but interesting that we're not.
Final thoughts before I let you go. Like I said, fluid situation. I still think there's value, to why we got to this point, right? What is worth holding on to, what's worth letting go. I mean, even if, like I said, they vote here this evening, I think I just don't want it to be lost, why we're going through this and why we're doing this.
True. I think that they do have to come out and say, this is what we really wanted to hold on to. Because I've heard conflicting reports, right? Nick Arbuckle, a quarterback from Edmonton, said it had nothing to do with the Canadian ratio. But every other person I hear from says that's all it has to do with is the Canadian ratio. So it's not so much the money anymore. What's really happening? What have they decided is important? You're right. Come down to this. Now it looks like they're just I think the reason the fans are mad, it comes down to the players looking a little bit more money hungry. And you say $1,500 a person, and this is what you're holding up the season for? Come on, you guys. No, it's way more important than that. Come out and tell us why what you're negotiating is so important, why it matters to you as a players association, and what's the most important thing to you as the ownership group too. So let's get this going. But I haven't lost faith yet, Reed. I know that they realize how important it is. The CFL is important to all of Canada, and getting back to normal is important for the players, the coaches, the general managers, the owners, and us in the media, and even more so, I'll give them credit, the fans.
There you go. I will say, the CFLPA, I think, could do a better job vocalizing some of this. We get a lot of we're sending out messages to our members, we're meeting, whatever. Like you said, I do think them coming out, either now or obviously at the end and saying this is why we went through all this, because I think that there is goodwill that's been lost. It's been very interesting to me, like I said, how we started the conversation, the flip that's happened over the last week.
It is. It's really interesting, and that's what, to me, what the players have been fighting for as much as anything is transparency from the owners, right? In terms of the revenue sharing too. What are they doing? Why won't you let us look at your books? We're partners. You tell us we're partners, yet you're telling us our revenue sharing, we can't look at the books to make sure that you're paying us our 25%. 25%. Every other league is 50%. So come on, owners, let's be a little bit more transparent. Tell us what's going on. But the owners have to do that, and the players need to tell us why they're fighting so hard for this protection of the ratio. And I think that honesty is always the best policy, isn't it? Isn't that an old cliche? And it still rings true. Let us know. We're the guys who follow you in the media, and the fans who pay the ticket prices want to know what's happening. And it's only fair that you tell everybody what's happening.
Well, Darrell, you were fired up today. I appreciate this. I think this was a good. I think this was a good outing for you. You were a good person to have on. I appreciate this. Darrell Davis, friend of the show, Hall of Fame reporter, right? And treasurer for the Football Reporters of Canada.
Secretary Treasurer, make your bookings now, okay? Yeah, the Football Reporters of Canada. So you're a paid member. You're our first American member in a while, since the 90s, when we were down in the United States traveling to Birmingham and Shreveport and almost dying.
Oh, this is good. Well, we'll have you on again here, but we'll certainly see you in November, hopefully, right, for the Grey Cup on the 30th.
All right, stay warm. Thanks, Reed.
Thanks. Well, I'm excited today. We have another PFF member of the family joining the podcast. We have Eric Eager. How are you doing, sir?
I'm doing great. I'm happy that we're 6 weeks in, and we still have games, unlike the XFL, which ended a little bit too early.
I know we're at that point now. We've crossed the threshold. Gameplay seems to be going up. I do lament ratings. I wish that. We were saying before we recorded, I think a little more preseason would have helped. Kind of as the gameplay is going up, I do feel like viewership is struggling a little bit.
Yeah, and early on when they opened the markets up for this league, you had Fox Bet, for example, had game totals that were in the 50s, and then by the time it was all said and done, week one, everybody bet those things down into the low 40s, and then the first week, you had an over on the first night, which was cool with the Generals and the Stallions, but then you had 3 straight unders and kind of bad play. And then in week 2, you had, I think 3 out of the 4 games went under in that game as well, or that week as well. But now the last 2 weeks, week 5 and week 6, all 8 games have gone over the Vegas total, which has been great. You even had the rule change where in the first and third quarters, incomplete passes were followed by the clock starting over, which caused, scoring to go down a little bit, at least initially. But now it seems to have rebounded. Like, I actually think the last, few weeks, you've actually gotten really solid quarterback play. Jordan Tiamu, who was really good in the XFL, struggled the first few weeks. He's played well in the last couple weeks. Case Cookus has come into his own. In New Jersey, the second best team in the league right now. You had an injury in DeAndre Johnson. Luis Perez came in and was, kind of okay in his stead. And then even though we've had some movement at the quarterback position, even with a starter getting cut this week in Shea Patterson, I even think Shea Patterson's been fine this year. I don't necessarily think he's been quite as bad as we thought.
Yeah, I got hammered on it. We had Ian on, and we said the USFL quarterback play better than XFL 2020. And man, I got absolutely thrashed online about that.
I think the breadth is better. So I would say especially now that you have Vlad Lee in for Pittsburgh, a team that was extremely offensively challenged the first couple, bunch of weeks of the season. And then, you have, Case Cookus. I think Brian Scott was playing really well. But, Cookus in his stead has been okay. Kyle Sloter's been the best quarterback in the league. I think if you look at the XFL from 2020, Josh Johnson and Philip Walker were both better than Kyle Sloter. And Jordan Tiamu was probably better. But the worst quarterbacks in that league were like when you had, I'm forgetting the Steelers quarterback who was starting for one of those teams. But you had some really bad quarterback play at the very bottom of the league, where I think here, all the quarterbacks in this league that are starting currently are better than like the bottom 3 or 4 quarterbacks that started for the XFL.
Well, I agree with that. Yeah, I think the floor is higher on the USFL, right? The ceiling, I mean, like I said, PJ and Josh Johnson, you're better than anyone in this league, right? I think Brian Scott was trying to get there. I was in. I mean, obviously he's not playing right now, but I thought, as good as he was, it did feel like it was a big stage for him, right? I think he was getting the momentum going, but I do think the first couple weeks, because it is, you go from playing spring league and D3 or whatever, and then you go and now you're on Fox, and I thought he did really good considering. I mean, it is a shame, probably one of the saddest storylines of the season, that he had to go home.
Well, and it worked. The season works backwards too. Like in the NFL, the trend is passing is really hot at the beginning of the fall, and then once the weather cools down, the efficiencies go down. In the spring league, it's sort of the opposite, right? At the very beginning, you're starting the league. In the case of the XFL and the AAF, you started in February, and then it got warmer as the season progressed. Here, you started in April, which is still not, in Birmingham, not cold by any stretch of the imagination, but now the weather's relatively warm. And so I think even from like the ambient expectations of what passing should be, it should be going up, right? Because the weather's getting better as the season progresses.
Just overall, and I kind of want to get into some of the week's news here or whatever, but overall thoughts on USFL. I mean, has this been successful in your eyes?
So far, I think a lot of folks will look and say, we'll wait until we see if any of these guys get into the NFL. We've seen contributions. I mean, Josh Johnson started a game last year for the Ravens, played some for the Jets. Philip Walker has been a competent backup quarterback in the NFL for a couple of years now. Donald Parham is a part of the Chargers offense. Down the list, you see players. Storm Norton is a tackle in the NFL now. You want to see this league be a feeder league into the other leagues. But insofar as the league in a vacuum, you want to see interest. And I think, unfortunately, the interest just wanes, when it has to compete. And that's the thing. Like, I actually think it was smart of them to wait until April to start the league, because then you're not competing like the Super Bowl hangover thing. And then people are kind of in February, March, they're like a little dragging and stuff. And people don't want to go to a game in, like, let's say Seattle in the middle of March when the weather's terrible. I think once we start to see like all the cities being able to host their games, you're going to get better. We saw it the other night when Birmingham hosted their game. There was a lot of fans in the stands. It's probably the most well-attended game prior to other than the first game. TV ratings are down, but like it's competing against the NHL finals, the NBA finals, and baseball to a certain extent. So, we have to temper expectations there. The DFS markets, the first game, I believe the top DFS pot was $100,000. Now it's $10,000. So you're certainly seeing less gambling on the league as well. I think if they get through the year and then there's a plan to play next year and they play next year, this year will be thought of as a success. Because I just don't see, I need to see that out of one of these leagues before I'm going to be really happy about it. And I think they're trending in that right direction. I mean, again, I don't think ratings are great, but they're not a disaster. And if you look at the Birmingham games, people go to the Birmingham games.
It's interesting. And I've thought a lot about it this week, and not to be argumentative on it. I really did like the April timeline when they announced everything for all the reasons you said, right? Like, let's avoid the Super Bowl hangover, and it's not, it's not going to be 30 degrees in Seattle or all these things. We can get nicer weather. Now we're hitting this weekend. It's Memorial Day, right? They front loaded the schedule. So many, NBC Fox games this weekend. There's only one, right, on, I think Fox or NBC. The other three are on, cable. People are going outside. It's nice weather. I'm really afraid that this is not the right time of year to play, especially with the Stanley Cup Finals, with the NBA. It's so funny. Like, we had Darrell Johnston on. Like in November, he was on a radio station being like, this is the perfect time to play. Like, we've looked at the calendar and we're going to get players into camps. We're going to do all this stuff. And now it's like, well, I mean, we're competing against the Premier League and we're competing against, just, it's the best time of year to compete until it's not. I don't know. And I don't know if the XFL, the February's, I don't know if there is a good spring timeline, but I feel like this is not trending in that good direction.
Yeah, I get worried because, the finals are end of June. Like, a player would almost have to stop playing for their USFL team and sign almost immediately to play with an NFL team. So if you're trying to be a feeder league, maybe that's not the right thing. Also, like the third week of the season was competing against the NFL draft, which again, like, it depends upon if you're me and you're a degenerate about football and you love football, you go straight from day 3 of the draft to watching these games and you love it. I would be a bad television executive because I'm not the target audience. So, that those are all things like I think that have to be taken into consideration when we discuss this stuff. I personally, for example, I know you're wearing the CFL hat. I love the CFL because it starts like in this, but again, like that's part of Canadian culture that's already embedded into how everybody's doing everything, right? Like this spring football is not embedded into the United States culture. And, so it's going to take some getting used to. I really hope that the NFL sees one of these spring leagues and says, okay, I want to invest in it. I want to get better. Because look, again, from the way that is it working, I think you're at least getting reps for quarterbacks who are young. And currently in the NFL, there are not developmental quarterbacks. Like there are 2 quarterbacks on every team. One's a veteran, terrible guy like Chad Henne, and another guy's a guy that if you get hurt, you're screwed. Most of that is because of the CBA, but part of that is because we don't have a developmental league in the NFL anymore. And so if you get, or at all, and so if you get this kind of, traction, I think that it can benefit football in general.
I am surprised, and especially this week, we had the big XFL announcement last week, right? ESPN, ABC, Fox owning this. I watch NFL Network every morning when I run on the treadmill, and like the content is horrendous right now, right? Because it's like this weird, we're post-draft, we're getting ready for this, we're ranking running backs from the 90s or whatever. I'm like, the fact that the XFL or USFL, like the NFL Network can't give them a slot during the week to like, let's talk about this stuff. Let's broadcast some of the games. Like that to me is how you're going to get this to the next level, because there's not enough NFL. Like right now is the dead time. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, and Colin Cowherd and stuff, like he pretends to talk about it, right? Like, oh, I'm going to read the highlights. Or we have like Skip and Shannon talking about it. But I really think if you put an hour on, there's so much content right now on NFL Network that I think they could utilize some of this on their streaming.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that's also what, last year we had the FCS that was happening during this time of year, and we're just not used to talking about we're not used to talking about football unless it's the most amazing thing in the world. And that's the other part of like when you have a college football schedule that overlaps with the NFL. I was this way before I worked on football professionally. You can ignore college football if you're an NFL fan. Right. So and you can ignore the NFL if you're a college football fan, and you can be completely satisfied because they sort of overlap. And maybe there's a little bit of that where the NFL is seeing in their, data that their fans only really want one league. I think the way to lean into it and maybe get more people interested is to lean into betting. And I know, the XFL really tried that. Ultimately they were poor at doing it because most broadcasters don't have experience talking about fantasy football or gambling during a broadcast. But that might be how it has to be, because honest to God, like most of the people that talk to me, and most of the reason I'm watching USFL is because I like to gamble on football. And I think there's a real edge in some of these developmental leagues. The league should probably lean into it. And I know, in the last year for Arena Football League, they really did. Ultimately, it wasn't enough for them to stay around. But like that has to be it for, basically all of these leagues that aren't like a top 4 male sport in the United States. Really do have to lean into that stuff, because the gamification is what causes people to play or to watch more sports. The data is very clear. If you gamble on sports, you play fantasy football, you just watch more sports. And the more that you can lean into that, the more that of a piece of the pie is available to leagues that aren't endowed with the privileges that other leagues have at the very beginning.
That reminds me, like speaking CFL, like last year when they, because they passed single game sports betting, and like you had Milt Stiegel like every week, like, are you taking the over? Are you taking the over? Are you taking? Because like you said, they don't know. Like they know they're supposed to talk about it, right? Like we're supposed to talk about gambling, but they don't. They have no clue. Like you said, like, God forbid, like have you or someone on, that is entrenched in this stuff. Go do a hit. Like you got Brock Heward on the sidelines running around. Talk to you. Have you on? Like, well, I'm looking at the over-unders here. I don't even know what the hell you talk about because I'm not in the world, but like certainly I think that would be a really easy way, have someone sitting at their computer at home and looking at this stuff online.
I think so. Yeah, exactly. And then I know, there have been some bet casts We at PFF did a bet cast for 3 playoff games last year. It was a lot of fun, and it was viewed by a lot of people. People love that, and I just think the broadcasts are like not really equipped right now to sort of do that in a very robust way yet. But that doesn't mean they can't in the future.
Ian, I like looking at like tangible stuff that we can look at here. In terms of kind of the roster stuff this week, it was interesting, right? So originally we had Shea Patterson and Kyle Lauletta cut. And I think a lot of people were surprised about that. You talk about the sports betting and all of that. What do you make of like how we announce roster transactions, roster moves with the USFL?
I mean, it's at one end, if you're just betting based upon like team level metrics, kind of like I am, it's actually better probably because there's not like these little nitty gritty, ubiquitous, reports that we have are just not available in the USFL, right? Like, I think back a couple weeks ago when Jamar Smith got COVID, and then everybody's like, "Oh, he's cleared," and then we all thought he was going to start, and so then that point spread moved out a little bit, and then we found out that Magoo was going to start, and then that point spread moved down, and like, I think for me, like I got in that game, and again, I lost one of the bets. I had Tampa Bay plus 4.5, and then I came back with Birmingham minus 2.5, right? And that last field goal at the end screwed over my ability to get a middle there. But that kind of lack of clear information and lack of being able to synthesize it into point spreads and totals and stuff like that is advantageous for bettors, right? That being said, in trying to understand the league and trying to ingratiate the league to fans and stuff, like having it be not knowing that Paxton Lynch was going to start over Shea Patterson in week 3 until the last minute, like people don't necessarily, that's not things like people all of a sudden prefer, I guess. So I think it's a double-edged sword. I would like obviously more information, but that requires beat reporters and that requires standardizing everything. Because let's be honest, the injury report in the NFL is standardized because of sports betting.
Well, that's the hard thing it's like PR department of one right now. I mean, it's really challenging with the USFL. Like, I get that it's frustrating to me, some of the cost cutting measures we do, considering like they're owned by Fox. Like, I get this isn't arena football trying to go like we got a bootstrap or the CFL. Like, you're owned by one of the major 4 broadcast. Like, we have the money and resources. It's just like it's a lack of wanting to do it because they don't see. Why would I spend, $100,000 on another PR person? We're not going to see $100,000 in revenue back. I just think it's short-sighted across the board. Every week it's like it's the bare minimum we can put in to get by is kind of my feeling.
I agree. I think that's where they're sloughing off a little bit, and to me that's just an admission that they might not get what it takes for these leagues to really work, right? They really do need, in my opinion, to really lean into the gamification of sports.
So what do you think? So now we have Kyle Lauletta. He's going to the Generals. So we thought they were cut. Now they're going on Shea Patterson to the Breakers. Obviously, so DeAndre Johnson, right, it hurt more than we think for the Generals, right? Is that why we're bringing in Lauletta as the backup?
I hope not. But and interestingly, so like I guess I take my cues from the markets here. It was very interesting. While we've been talking, there's been money on Pittsburgh. Birmingham opened, and I give Birmingham a full 3-point home field advantage. Birmingham opened, as 12.5-point favorites in this game, and now it's down to 11. So, and I know that Lauletta wasn't starting for Pittsburgh; it was Gladly. Gladly looked great in relief against Houston a couple weeks ago. Was not very good last week, except for at the very end. But you see some betting in on Pittsburgh, and then interestingly, New Orleans opened as 5.5-point favorites. That got bet out to 6. It's now back to 5.5. With this, Shea Patterson news, that must mean Paxton Lynch is healthy enough to start, or people are buying into whomever the second option there is for the Panthers. But New Jersey opened as 3-point favorites against Tampa Bay. In theory, I think because DeAndre Johnson was such an upgrade over Luis Perez long term, and that's been moved out to 4. So people have been betting New Jersey, even though there's a ton of uncertainty about what DeAndre Johnson's status is. It'll be interesting to see if that number stays there. as these limits go up and people start actually putting real money on these games.
Are you able to gauge, like, is there a lot of interest right now in the betting? Like, are you able, like, I mean, comparatively to, like, I mean, what do you, I mean, that's always the thing, is to say, well, you can't compare the USFL, but, like, I don't know, compared to, like, the Stanley Cup playoffs, I mean, that's not even a fair comparison, though. I mean, how do you look at the USFL, like, sports betting market right now?
Well, the market's move enough where I know that people aren't betting that much yet, right? So generally speaking, like a Premier League game, an NFL game, by the time you get to Sunday, those markets are so liquid that, like, you know, you can bet $1 million, you know, however, Pinnacle's taking $1 million aside on a Premier League game. So like, and those numbers don't move because eventually, you know, once enough people have put their money on the line, like the number is pretty sharp. In USFL, you see a lot of movement. Even like I remember the New Orleans game where everybody got lucky if they bet New Orleans against Houston. That game, New Orleans opened as 3.5-point favorites, closed as 6.5-point favorites. You just don't see 3-point moves in NFL markets or markets where there are a ton of bettors all that often. And that to me is an indication that there aren't as many bettors in this league, and they're coming in late because they don't have to get out ahead of the sharp players early like they do in some of the more established leagues.
It does seem like if you have even a modicum of knowledge of what's going on in the USFL, you're able to kind of run this table right now, right? More or less.
I don't know. Like, closing line value has not been worth that much in this league. So like, you know, most of the time, and Slaughter got lucky in the last game, but like a lot of times, like teams like New Orleans will take money and then they won't cover. They did cover this past week, which was good. They opened as 7-point favorites. They closed at 8-point favorites. So, you know, if you bet with closing line value there, you won. For a few weeks, unders were getting steamed pretty heavily, and then a lot of the games started going over. So like it's very unpredictable right now. It's not like I don't think it's indicative of an NFL market right now where sharps bet, numbers move in their way, and they win a significant amount of time. I think the sharp money makes sense. Like, I would bet, you know, a team, you know, for example, like the one bet that I really like this week, I bet Houston at +4 against Philadelphia. I just don't think Philadelphia's defense is very good, even though Houston's defense is also not very good. I've also bet over in that game. That was, I believe, 43. It's now 44. So you're seeing things move in the right direction. But like, you know, it's a small sample size game, and all the reasons why I'm betting these two things, like, I'm saying that Philadelphia doesn't have a great defense based upon 6 games of work, right? Whereas, you know, I can better contextualize that in a sport like college football or NFL because I have multiple years and I have multiple teams.
Well, yeah, and carry over to next year, right? I mean, obviously, and it came out, Mike Mitchell with our site, XFL News site, had the, you know, part of the contract this week, like they're adding a new clause in where basically if you get released to go to an NFL camp and you get cut, you revert back to the USFL. Like, I mean, hopefully we're going to see carryover in the next year, right? I mean, that's the key, is kind of establishing these routines with these players. I mean, do you anticipate having a lot of continuity for next year?
I don't, but it'd be nice, right? Like, it was one of the reasons why I really liked betting the CFL this past year, because the year in between sort of reconstituted our priors a little bit on what the rosters were like, what the quarterbacks were like, what the coaches were like, and things like that. And there was continuity, of course. The teams that were good, you know, stayed good, and, you know, so on and so forth. But for these leagues, I'm almost always going to regress to the markets more in between seasons, just because there's just less staying power. Like when people can move up and move away, and also just like league rules will change. I guarantee you there are going to be league rule changes if this thing gets to a year or two that make, you know, the way in which we bet. Like, no, we've only seen 1 3-point attempt this year so far. Like, there's got to be ways to incentivize that. There's got to be ways to do to make this game more exciting. And like I said, like, of the 3 leagues, like, I bet, you know, a lot of AAF, about a lot of XFL. This has been the league so far that's been the most exciting, in my opinion, as far as like games going over the total, high scoring affairs. And it took a while for that to happen. You know, maybe next year they'll implement rules that will make the game exciting just right away from the get-go.
You do feel as though the quality of gameplay has been good?
the last few weeks, early on it was rough. And honestly, my biggest gripe with all of these leagues is that the coaching needs to, and I just don't know what the incentives are. Like, in the AAF, you had Mike Martz, who was once a brilliant mind. And then, you had Mike Singletary, who was never really a brilliant mind. And like, you almost always just had like retread coaches who were just bad at playing football the way that the NFL coaches were. And so you didn't get innovation on fourth down. You didn't get innovation offensively and so on and so forth. So and this league, you have Fisher, you have, you have Todd Haley, guys who like have had success in the NFL, but are clearly over the hill, who like, why would I expect Todd Haley to be kind of woke on fourth down? Like, it's not in the cards there. I think the players are fine. Honestly, I think offensive line play in this league has been much better than offensive line play in the other developmental leagues. Maybe that's because defensive line play isn't quite as good, but like the quality of play is perfectly fine in this league. It's to me, you can boost it up another notch by making the coaches more innovative.
I totally agree with that. It's like we bring in Kirby Wilson. I mean, I think if you have someone else running that team, I think it's an entirely different. The hits with the coaching have been hits, and the misses have been pretty rough to kind of live through. I mean, even Jeff Fisher is like, what is going on with the Panthers? I mean, he was a big crowd favorite going into it.
Exactly, and now he's 1-5, and I think like 1-5 against the spread as well. So like that has not been a particularly strong, comeback. And then again, like, what was the reason he got kicked out of the NFL? He got kicked out of the NFL because he was slow to adapt and he was coaching like it was 1994 as opposed to 2022. And that's, that's always going to be an issue. And, he was never a great tactician to begin with. He was a great motivator, but yeah, I think you need more than that now.
Any final thoughts before we let you go today? I mean, like I said, gameplay is continuing to improve. I worry this weekend with Memorial Day and everything. I'm a little scared of what the ratings are going to look like. I finally found it here. You have USA has got, the one, FS1, and then we have another Peacock game on Sunday. I mean, what are your thoughts for the weekend?
I think these games are going to be, I'm looking forward to all of them. Obviously, there's going to be the one kind of snoozer where you have Birmingham as 11-point favorites against Pittsburgh. That one, I've already laid the points of Birmingham. I don't think Kirby Wilson can coach. I think the Vlad Lee thing was a one-game sample, and I think Birmingham. There's a little bit of an issue, obviously, with Jamar Smith. Even though they covered the spread last week, Jamar Smith was kind of iffy, and then you put in Alex Magoo at the end, and even then they needed that like third and forever pass to be complete for them to score on that last drive. But you have Bo Scarborough, and I sort of physical teams that run the football in the NFL, like that's diminished because quarterback play is so important. But when quarterback play is not as important in leagues like this, like teams that can just run the football and out physical other teams late in games, to me, can cover big spreads. I like the over in the Philadelphia-Houston game. Neither defense is very good. Houston is obviously, has had the lead in every game at halftime so far this year. I think Clayton Thorson, is wild, but he can be effectively wild at times. And then Philadelphia has the running game that I think can, really push the football down the field along with Case Cookus. And then lastly, like this to me, it'll be interesting to see, but I like New Orleans laying 5.5 against Michigan. Slaughter's been up and down, but like on balance has been the best quarterback in that league. And I think like in this particular game, they run the most plays, by the way. They're a little slower, but it's weird. They run their games have the most plays. So I like the over in that game as well.
Well, Eric Eager with PFF, I really appreciate you coming on. Hopefully we can, touch base here again soon and maybe near the end of the season.
I'd love to. This was fun. I love chatting spring leagues and all that good stuff. So thanks for having me on.
Awesome. And yeah, well, Godspeed to the CFL as well. Hopefully we can get this all resolved. Well, we have Cody Main here from Establish the Run. We had your, cohort Adam on a couple weeks ago. How are you doing today?
I am great. I guess you could call Adam my boss. Adam is the co-founder over at ETR. I'm just one of his little minions trying to help out and make the engine run.
Well, that's good. But this is good. Like I've said a couple times on the podcast, this was the lifeblood of me trying to find good USFL people to talk about getting involved with all this fantasy. Because, like we have our writers and stuff at XFL News Hub that cover, or I should say USFL News Hub, Mark, they cover all this stuff. But like, trying to find quality people every week to talk USFL is challenging sometimes.
Yeah, it is. And people like yourself and Ian and Adam and others in the industry that have covered it from, an entertainment and media perspective like you guys are, and also from the fantasy and sports betting side like we are. I think we've got a good mix of people really have eyes and ears on everything that's going on in the USFL now.
So what do you make? We're approaching week 7 here, right? Memorial Day weekend here. What do you make of the USFL through 6 weeks of gameplay?
I've been impressed, coming at this from a fantasy angle. I had my worries coming in, if you will. We've been through this before with the XFL, with the AAF, all to varying degrees of success in terms of fantasy and sports betting. I would say from the beginning, I wish they were a little bit more willing to embrace our specific audience, the fantasy side, the sports betting side, and really put an emphasis on that. Now, the fact that we have lines available almost everywhere where you can sports bet, the fact that we have DFS that we can play weekly has been encouraging, and really the play on the field has been better than I had expected. Coming in, I think we've got a lot of good quarterbacks now in the league as we approach week 7. We've got a lot of good offensive play callers, which was something I wasn't so sure of coming in as well, and some teams zigging while others zag, and making a good mix of pass first and run first teams, and really putting good product on the field week after week.
Yeah, I've kind of exhausted myself with like complaining about like things they could be doing right now, because it does just feel like we're riding the course through the season. I've kind of resigned myself to that. I think there's really easy, tangible things every week here that could be done to kind of help. I just feel like we're riding, like we shot the rocket off week 1, and like whatever that fuel is taking this season, like that's what we're doing. We are not changing anything. We are not trying to do anything else. We're going to make little tweaks, right? Like we're going to add some more practice squad people, but like overall, this is the hand we've been dealt for this season.
And I think the small additions that they have made, the small changes that they've made, whether it be, roster related stuff or, the play clock thing that we can get into, with them reducing the number of plays by speeding up the clock in the first and third quarters, stuff like that has been good for the product. It makes the game a little bit shorter, makes it a little bit more watchable. And then adding practice squad players, that was one small tweak that just seems so necessary covering this stuff. From a fantasy perspective, there were weeks where there's only one active running back on the roster, weeks where there wasn't a backup quarterback, weeks where wide receivers were playing 100% of snaps because there just weren't enough bodies. So, I agree with you in the sense that they're not really too willing to make big sweeping changes now, which is probably the correct move as an organization. But the small changes that they've made have been welcomed especially by people in our industry.
Well, the practice squad and having, so what it was 2 to the roster, so 38 to 40, and then an extra 3. So, we have 50 people, right? Am I doing the math there?
Yeah.
Here we still don't have the stars, still don't have a backup quarterback. Mark Andrews is like, I think he's just waiting for Brian Scott to get back, which is fair. I think Brian's trying to kind of get back here near the end of the season, but like, it was interesting timing with the XFL announcements and everything with the USFL adding the roster spots. There's now a new clause in their contracts that previously you could be let out of your USFL contract to go play, to go either try out or get to be on an NFL roster. And now if they cut you anytime during the year, you revert back to the USFL contract, which is interesting. So, they're making tweaks. I think some of it is pro USFL. I do think some of it is more like we're protecting against the XFL. Curious to see where that winds up.
That's going to be an interesting thing, having both of these, I call them developmental leagues, having both of these spring leagues available. And then you've also got, the CFL that's also competing for talent as well. I don't know if there's going to be a large enough player pool to field competitive rosters and field talented rosters when the XFL is running, when the USFL is running, when we've got CFL games. There's just, we get into this situation fairly quickly where we don't have enough talented players to field a product that people are willing to watch. So I hope we don't run into that situation with the XFL and the USFL where we've got enough good players available. And maybe the XFL can steal some talent, from guys directly coming out of college that would help improve their process as well. But yeah, I'm curious to think what you think in terms of, is there a large enough talent pool to field good, deep rosters for a USFL league and an XFL league?
Well, I mean, we had Eric Galco on a couple weeks ago. Eric was the director of player personnel for XFL 2020, and he said no. And it was funny because a lot of people were like, why? I don't agree with that. I'm like, I don't know, man. Like, the dude built the league. I mean, he was the one that set up the rosters, but he had said when he was running, not running, but when he was in his role at the XFL, he had a list of every available offensive lineman that wasn't signed by the XFL. And as the season was going on, they were bringing in guys, and that list was getting smaller and smaller. And he said, like, when they stopped at week 5, there wasn't a lot of names left on that list, right? And this was a small sample size of the XFL, right? We didn't have fan control football. We didn't have the USFL. Like, in terms of quarterbacks and O-line play, I just don't know if there is enough. I mean, we see here, and I want to get your thoughts on these, quarterback moves with the USFL this week, but like, we're even seeing some of the USFL quarterbacks not producing maybe the way that we thought that they would be, let alone having another league.
Yeah, there's a handful of guys that I think are a clear cut above and are, the most talented in the league. And that list includes, Jamar Smith and Alex Magoo. Both guys just happen to be on the Birmingham Stallions as easily the best team in the league. And then you've got DeAndre Johnson, who's kind of this rushing dynamo that no one can seem to handle, but he's dealing with an ankle injury. I really liked Brian Scott. I really like what Brian Scott and Bart Andrews were doing. I hope he comes back fully healthy by the end of the season. That would be nice. And then, Kyle Sloter, as a guy who plays NFL preseason daily fantasy, Kyle Sloter was a guy who tore it up in NFL preseason, and I would liken this to a similar level of competition. But once you get past, those handful of guys, then you start dipping your toes into some quarterbacks who really haven't shown much. And then we've seen some of this movement lately, kind of inter squad with some quarterbacks changing teams that hadn't been producing. We've got Shea now as the presumptive quarterback 3 in New Orleans. We've got Kyle Lavaletta changing teams. I'm just curious how deep that player pool can continue to go when you're talking about now 8 teams in the USFL, 8 teams in the XFL, and you've still got NFL teams that are going to be competing for some of these guys to keep on their practice squads or to have just as preseason arms, guys that they can rely on in games that are meaningless to them. So, I just don't know if there's enough quarterback talent, first of all, and then you get into the other positions. As a fantasy guy, I hardly even think about offensive line play, but that's so important. And there's just how many of these big guys can you put in the trenches and keep them healthy and keep teams full with healthy bodies. It's just going to get to a point where I don't think we have enough to keep all of these leagues up and running.
Well, and this is, where we had 3 now of kind of the 8 first draft, right? With Laletta not really great. I mean, maybe they weren't in the best positions, right? Shea Patterson, but when we saw yesterday that the number 1 draft pick was cut, right? You already had Ben Holmes get sent home from New Jersey, right? So now we have Laletta moving, Shea Patterson, like, those were like 3 of the top 8 guys that were picked. I mean, obviously the quarterback was the first round of it, right? But I mean, this was 3 of your top 8 guys picked. Number 1 overall was Shea. Everyone questioned that from the beginning. And now it's interesting that like, we're still struggling with these guys. And these were, I would think, would be your surefire picks that you would have.
And that's the frustrating thing, right? From what you see, from the general public too, is it just serves as confirmation bias for these people that were already against the league. And then they see, or had negative things to say about the league without ever watching, or being involved in any manner. And now all of a sudden you see the first overall draft pick, Shea Patterson, being, waived, released, or whatever the case was, and ends up on another team and is now going to be a backup quarterback. And that's not fair. Jeff Fisher in Michigan is doing what they can to field the best possible team that they can. And Shea just wasn't the answer. Whether it is Paxton Lynch coming back from injury or one of these guys that they've recently added, you almost have to give them some credit for willing to kind of cut bait on a guy that just wasn't, getting it done. And are mistakes going to be made? NFL GMs make mistakes in terms of evaluating player talent, sure. But I guess I've been more impressed than I have been disappointed in terms of the level of quarterback play that's been fielded. And these guys getting cut, released, traded, whatever it is, it doesn't dampen my expectations. I think we've seen more good quarterback play than we have bad to this point.
Well, I agree with that. It's interesting, because we were bringing in guys here. We had Bad Lee last week, came in, looked like a godsend to Pittsburgh. 2 weeks ago, last week, really struggled. And it was so funny. I was like watching the broadcast while I was driving, and they're like, well, Bad he just hasn't had enough time, because Gaither, they just like their timing's off. And I'm like, he came in the first week and did great. So I think part of it too is they're able to kind of study up and figure out what's going on. I mean, the XFL saw that with the Dragons. I think it was versus the Battlehawks, and we pulled Brandon Silvers and we put in BJ Daniels, and he looked great. And then we still lost, but it was sometimes if they're just not used to that game plan, Vad comes in 4 or 5 days out. But it was funny that they're he just needs more time to figure out the timing with Bailey. I'm like, well, he didn't seem to have a problem last week with that.
That's another thing that these guys just didn't have a whole lot of time, not even just VAD, but all of these teams in general. The training camps were very brief. These guys haven't had a lot of practice time, even now 6 weeks into the season. You think about NFL rosters that are together for years and just frequently continuing to add pieces to them, but they've got full training camps. They've got years worth of, installing a playbook, years worth of just that continuity. And we haven't had that with the USFL. So I would be curious, if these teams stick together, the nucleuses of these teams stick together in terms of, quarterback, offensive line, wide receiver, running backs. Will we see a step forward in offensive play next year, even when they've had more time together? That was one thing coming in to week one that we had noted in all of our content was just lower your expectations a little bit for these offenses. They just haven't had a lot of practice time, haven't had a lot of time together. And I think we're starting to see that improve. I think that's played itself out in the betting markets as well. I think the last 11 or 12 games have hit the over. We're seeing more offensive explosiveness now. And I think that's a direct correlation with these teams having more time together.
So, right, we talked USFL adding this, the clause, whatever, get players back for next year, right? And part of that, like I said, is I saw a lot of complaints from the XFL writers they're trying to lock up all this stuff. Well, that's good business, right? A, it's good business because you need to have players. B, like we said, help increase continuity, right? Okay, let's keep enough of these guys together, right? CFL struggles with that sometimes. In terms of, so let's say we do keep the players together, right? We get a good batch of Birmingham back together. Skip Holtz probably isn't the best example, but do we see all of these 8 coaches? Is Kirby Wilson getting another run at this? Is Jeff Fisher getting another run at this?
That's what I hope the league is, just like some of these coaches have been willing to cut bait on players that haven't performed up to expectation. I hope the league is kind of willing to do the same in that aspect, right? We've seen pretty good coaching, offensive play calling. We've seen pretty good coaching decisions, both in game and from a roster perspective from a lot of these teams. And I hope that's rewarded. And I hope some of these coaches that have struggled, while, never happy to see anybody out of a job, but while I hope that some of these coaches that have struggled, I am hopeful that the league will do what they can to improve, kind of some parity within the league. I think you've got a clear group of top teams right now separating through week 6 and a clear group of teams that are just not there yet. And I think that would continue to play itself out if they ran it back next year. So guys, like Kirby Wilson, who this is his first time as a head coach, guys like Jeff Fisher, who, struggled at the NFL ranks and was probably the biggest name guy coming in, but get some young blood in here, get some guys that are trying to climb up the coaching ranks as opposed to, just starting to leave the coaching ranks. Kirby Wilson was a running backs coach for 29 years, right? Let's get some guys that are young and upcoming and want to take this path wherever it may lead them, as opposed to kind of taking it into retirement. So yeah, I've been impressed by guys like Skip Holtz. I've been impressed starting to come around again on Todd Haley as a guy that's shown a little bit more offensive genius now with Jordan Ta'amu. And man, Bart Andrews, as a fantasy guy, as a guy that plays, points per reception fantasy, I love watching Bart Andrews drop back, 70% of his offensive plays and just let his quarterback step back and sling it. So give me more guys like that are willing to kind of push the envelope and do things a little bit in kind of that new age way of that, that we're starting to fall in love with the NFL.
It's getting to the point where, like you said, in terms of, some of these teams are so great, right? Like Birmingham. it's getting to the point where these matchups aren't exciting, right? Like here we have the Stallions this week on Fox, right? That's, get all the people there, whatever. It's 11 on a Sunday. So, we got the church crowd. I see a lot of, like that kind of stuff. But, that's the big game. But then they're going up against the Maulers, right? Like, okay, so now we're getting, what I'm saying? Like even now, some of the big teams, like there's such a disparity between some of the good ones and some of the bad teams that they're not the most enticing matchups.
I know in that game, 12.5-point favorites are the Stallions. And, you think about that in terms of, in terms of an NFL game, you're thinking like, peak Patriots with Tom Brady versus like the Jets, you know what I mean? Like, and people aren't lining up to watch that game, for an NFL game. And I have been impressed by the USFL just continuing to churn out number after number in terms of TV ratings go. Been very impressed by that. But you do have to wonder like how often, our casual fans, how often will they continue to sit around for a game that's a double-digit blowout? You have to try to get some of these premier matchups in the right time slots so we get the most eyeballs on this league. And again, just serves this confirmation bias when you see these like 35-7 scores between teams like the Stallions and the Maulers that just people that want to say that there isn't enough talent to get this league through. But I just don't think that that's the case. It just happens that some of these teams have separated to a point where they're so much better than the bottom end of the league. And I think that, looking at the Stallions and the Generals, and now Philadelphia is coming on a little bit. There's these top teams just look a clear cut above the 3 or 4 that we would think of as the bottom.
So we did this kind of last week, but curious your thoughts. So, Birmingham number 1, right, with a bullet. Generals number 2. You would put Stars at number 3.
Yeah, and I know they've gotten lucky here over the last couple of games, and they've been in some pretty close games with Michigan and last week with Tampa Bay. I think if it's not Stars, and again, this is a little bit of a personal bias because I'm high on Andrews, I'm high on Brian Scott. Hope he comes back healthy at the end of the year. I think the Breakers have a really good top to bottom roster. We haven't seen what we've wanted to out of Kyle Sloter over the last couple of weeks, but I think that when he is on, he might be the best real life quarterback in this league, maybe behind Jamar. And then you've got the whole different dynamic with DeAndre Johnson on the rushing ability, but I think he might be the best real life quarterback in this league. So I think when he is right, this Breakers team might have as high a ceiling as the Stallions.
Worst team, right? Maulers.
Yeah. Yeah. Unfortunately, because, and it's easy to bag on Kirby Wilson. They didn't start out hot with the Pizzagate incident that they had in training camp that was broadcasted widely. But, I have to give them some credit. They came out in that first game against Tampa Bay with, what can only be considered just a god awful game plan of 7, 8, 9 offensive linemen on the field and just running directly into their backs. And he's starting to pass more. He's doing what he can. And part of that's game script, right? Like they're down, they have to pass to come back. But he's brought in Vadley. He's trying to do things to spark this team. But I think it's pretty clear that they're kind of the bottom of the barrel. And then up from that, Houston, Michigan, and that to me all stems down to play calling and quarterback play, right? Like, Clayton Thorson wasn't a great quarterback in college. Clayton Thorson wasn't a good quarterback in the NFL preseason, and he hasn't proven to be a great quarterback here. He's had some big plays. He's sparked some really good offensive drives, but I think the consistency isn't there. And then with Michigan, I think when they went to turn to Paxton Lynch, there was something there, and then he got injured. They had to go back to Shea, and that's unfortunate because I would have wanted to see that team for the last couple of weeks with Paxton Lynch under center. Maybe we're talking about a different situation here, but as it stands, Maulers, Houston, Panthers is probably the 3 worst teams in the league right now.
I had a joke earlier I was going to make, and I forgot. It is like with the Kirby Wilson thing, or like with Clayton Thorson, like you do in life, you fail up until you can't, you go as high and then you fail at whatever that saying is, right? It's like, well, now we've discovered like, okay, Kirby Wilson is a good running backs coach, is not a great head coach. Like, you fail up in life until you cannot continue anymore.
Yeah, and then you get knocked back down a peg. And that's being a head coach in any league, I can't imagine is easy, especially with no previous experience. He's coming in as just a running backs coach, and I like the running backs. I like Garrett Groshek. I like Madre London, but it's a whole different ball game when you've got a game plan, when you've got to be kind of the CEO of a football team. And I think that's just a whole different ball game for some of these guys. You know, it's been one of those things it's been weird to see Jeff Fisher not have a little bit more success because he was a head coach for so long. And you would think that, you know, some of that would translate here, but he's just been too unwilling, to do things differently offensively. And maybe he knows he was limited by Shea. Maybe that's the reason why they got him out of there. But, you have to be willing to evolve and adapt in these type of leagues. And I think the coaches that have done that are the ones that are being rewarded with success.
Well, that's like, Madre London coming in from, huge. He was in the European League of Football, right? He was with Elf coming in. Like, he's been fine, but I don't think I think he's on one of my fantasy teams, but like, he's not, to my recollection, has not had the outstanding season like he did last year in Elf.
When I saw that signing and saw the stat line that he put up in European League of Football the year prior, man, I was taken aback. I had to look at it to see, like, maybe every running back in this league does this type of thing. Maybe this is just a running league, and it wasn't. It's just this guy was freakishly good in the European League of Football. It's been disappointing not to see that, but yeah, I think there's kind of a clear group of running backs who, some of which I think could easily play, in NFL preseason teams, make NFL practice squads. You talk about CJ Marable on that Stallions team, and then Bo Scarborough coming in, who has had a cup of coffee in the NFL. Matt Colburn, who, people that have followed me, people that follow our content at ETR know I have a love affair with Matt Colburn. 3 touchdowns last week. He's been impressive. Reggie Corbin on that Panthers team, despite them not being very efficient offensively, he's been a really good running back for them. And then, you've got the bowling ball in New Jersey with Darius Victor. He's an interesting watch, big, short, but big, and tough to bring down. And then Mark Thompson for Houston. I wish he was on a better team, man, because the offensive line just isn't doing a whole lot of favors for him, not creating much running lanes for him to get through. But when he finds them, man, he puts his foot down and goes. And it's fun to watch him in this league, that big body running. And we've seen that on display a couple of times. But I think there's a handful of running backs here that, are really, really good and really fun to watch. Yeah,
Colburn is great. I mean, I remember he was in the spring league 2 ago. I remember he had like a walk-off punt return for, I can't remember if it was a kickoff for a touchdown or a punt return for a touchdown. And I was like, this guy is a freaking star. I mean, that was 2 years ago. Like, I'm so glad that he is kind of getting, some recognition for that now, because there are some of these guys that have been like mainstays for years that I'm happy that this, I go back and forth, right? Like, we want this to be a developmental league, right? But, I don't want these guys to go on and then be sitting in the practice squad or, you're riding the bench, you're getting paid. Like, I would rather them be able to stand out here, but that's probably not what they want, right? It's torn, right? Like, what I like about this league is also like probably the worst thing about it, because the best players are going to move on. And then maybe, look at PJ Walker, right? If you're a PJ Walker fan, is that exciting to see him come into Carolina a couple times a year? Like, I don't know. Not really.
From a player perspective, you have to hope that eventually the financial incentives align along with, what you imagine what they want as players, right? Like, I agreed with Matt Colburn. I don't think he wants to ride a bench, on an NFL, but he's getting paid a lot more to ride that bench, right? So you hope that if these leagues do find that level of success where they can afford to pay their best players more, you hope that eventually those financial incentives align where the best players can stay in the league because they're getting paid well, along with having that opportunity to play. I would imagine that all of these guys would say, I want to play, but if you're going to sign me up for an NFL practice squad and pay me 4X or 5X or whatever, you're going to pay me to stay here, I would take that opportunity. But I think there's so many guys that I would love to watch play at this level. If we can keep it going, play at this level, as opposed to, like you said, just sitting and cheering for them to maybe one day get in an NFL game if the guy ahead of them gets injured.
It's hard. It's like with the problem the CFL has is a vast majority of players would not choose to play in the CFL if they had the opportunity to go anywhere else, right? And that's the same thing with the USFL or the XFL. Like you said, we need this league to be around a couple of years and to be able to financially incentivize. Like, you want people to want to play in the league and not have it just be a stepping stone. I don't know if we'll ever get to that point, right? Obviously, that's the $1 million question and goal with all of that. But that's what I would like, because I like seeing these guys have success, and there's nothing worse. I mean, like, for the one Heineke in the world, right, that goes to Washington, I mean, you have so many guys, Parham, I mean, we can name the 4 or 5 guys, but other than that, it's like the 1% of everyone that goes on, and I wish we could make it a better place for the other 99%.
I know others have brought this up in the past, and I will be curious to see what, maybe the XFL does, and you probably know more with financial incentives. But others have brought up, what about a league setting aside a certain pool of money to fund contracts for, the best quarterbacks? There's a base salary for every player, 50,000, 60,000, whatever the case may be for the 10 weeks that they're playing. But then you set aside, a $5 million pool for the 8 quarterback spots, for the 8 starting quarterbacks, and they split up that pool, however that may be. And then once you start getting good quarterback play willing to stick around because they're getting paid more than they would to be in, an NFL preseason squad, then can you attract more talent? Can you attract a bigger audience? And then can you start paying the rest of your players a little bit more? It would be interesting to see. I wonder if a league would ever attempt to do that. Just to, we know the quarterback position is the most important on the field. Obviously, it all kind of starts there. Can we start by paying quarterbacks more and then funnel that down to the rest of the roster once we have our fan base built up?
Yeah, I mean, so the XFL 2020 did that, right? They had like the base quarterback was like 250,000, right? I think a couple of the guys got a little bit more like signing bonuses, maybe like 270. I know the USFL, I won't say I know. I have heard that the USFL is paying some of the quarterbacks slightly more, not nearly the discrepancy. But I agree. Like, if you can, I mean, I hear like Blake Bortles' name brought up all the time. Like, if we can pay Blake Bortles, 800,000 or whatever to come in and play, like, is that better than some of the guys? I think like the fact that Chad Henne chose to go to the CFL and not play in the USFL. He's like Jim Kelly's nephew or whatever. Like, I think I think the USFL could have paid to get him in if they wanted to, and they chose not to, right?
Yeah, and that would be the thing. Like, how many of these guys want to play here as opposed to sitting around on practice squads or going elsewhere? And if you can get to a point where guys actually choose to play there, it would be an interesting situation to actually have too much quarterback talent. If that was ever a possibility. But it will be interesting to see where the XFL starts to pull from. And as the USFL continues to progress into year 2, where that quarterback player pool comes from and which guys that they start to target. I think they have a good mix now of, electrifying guys with that rushing ability plus some pure pocket passers. And it makes for a fun viewing experience, in my opinion.
Before I let you go, USFL tweeted this out here since we've been on. I'm looking at it here. I want to get your take on it. I've been heard a lot made about this, right? How competitive the games are. It says here, 17 of 24 games so far decided by one score, 5 games, lead change in the final minute, 1-point games, 4 consecutive weeks. I've heard it both ways. Like, I've heard it like, too much parity is not a good thing, right? And obviously you want games to be close to the end. Where do you fall at that of having the 17 of 24? Like, is that a good thing?
That's an impressive stat. As we were just talking about how, we think Birmingham's going to run away with this game against the Maulers this week. Maybe we get a closer game than is being projected by Vegas. I guess just anecdotally, I thought that maybe there had been more blowouts than we had expected. So that's a good tweet there by the USFL. I would say that having a good mix of parity and kind of these super teams like we're seeing is about as good as the league could expect. I think that everyone knows that the Stallions are the best team in the South. Everyone knows that the Generals are the best team in the North. And then there's kind of this group in the middle and then the group at the end. And I think you want that from a fan engagement perspective as well. Just think back to, stealing an NBA example, that Warriors super team, right? We kind of knew that was a foregone conclusion with Kevin Durant and Draymond and Clay and Steph. We knew that was a foregone conclusion. It's not exactly a foregone conclusion that the Stallions are going to run away with the league this year, but it makes for a good rooting interest from both sides. You have the fans that want to see this team succeed, want to, the hometown team succeed. And then you've got everybody rooting against it on the other side, right? Because they're this powerful 6-0 team. We want to see a little bit of these underdogs come up and maybe have a shot towards the end. So I think if you're in the USFL front office right now, you've got to be pretty happy about where the league stands. I think having a front runner like this that everyone can chase down, that Birmingham is, I think that makes for an interesting storyline heading into the playoffs.
Any final thoughts before I let you go? I really appreciate you coming on. Like I said, maybe we get you on here again before the end of the season. Final thoughts?
Let's get Brian Scott back healthy. I am a big Brian Scott fan. Brian Scott followed me on Twitter, sent me a couple of DMs just thanking me for, I've engaged with him in some tweets and just been a big fan of the way that they play football. So let's get Brian Scott back and healthy. I think that the Stars have a chance to run down the Generals in the playoffs. I would love to see Philadelphia versus Birmingham in the championship game.
Yeah, Brian Scott, longtime friend of the show. We had him on when he won the MVP back in 2020. When they
That's awesome.
They had the big. I don't even think they called it because the Mega Bowl was last year in the Spring League. I don't know what they call. I think it was just like the Spring League Championship. But that was. Did you follow any of that? Like they canceled the season because of COVID and then played the championship in Orlando. Is that even on your radar?
It wasn't, but I went back and it's really tough to find Spring League stats and Spring League stuff. But I did fall in love with Brian Scott because of his appearances in the Spring League and watching some of the clips on YouTube, watching some of the highlights on YouTube. He was an interesting player back then, was an interesting player through the first couple of weeks of the USFL. I was just, as devastated as I can be for a guy that I really, don't know and a guy that I haven't rooted for a long time, devastated to see the injuries that sent him home because, it was a joy to watch him. It was a joy to watch that team. And Case Cook has just stepped up and played well, but I would love to see Brian Scott get back.
Yeah, the history of the TSL, and they were in San Antonio, and they allegedly weren't feeding their players enough, so they were going out to the Riverwalk, and then they got COVID, and it was all in the bubble, and then they had to shut it down. And we had Brian. What the hell is his name? The commissioner, who's the president of the USFL? Oh, Brian Woods. We have Brian Woods on the show, and he was defending it, and he was saying that. And we had Kent Shelby on, and he was. This was the reality TV show. This was, I think, peak Markcast about a year and a half ago when we had all this craziness going on. And who the hell would have thought that they all would be in the USFL now on Fox? It's pretty crazy.
That's awesome. I'm bummed I missed the Spring League now hearing those stories. It sounds like perfect made for TV type stuff.
I will send you the episode. It was a good one. I think it was called like RIP, whatever. I'll send it over. But Cody, I really appreciate this. Always fun to meet new people, and you and Adam and everyone over at Establish the Run. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
So I continue our conversation here. We had a little bit more.
One thing that I wanted to mention on the podcast, and I forgot to, so we're going to record again. I've been legitimately impressed by like a lot of the in-game stuff that the league has done, and while some of the stuff outside of what they're doing on the actual broadcast feels very vanilla, some of the stuff with the Twitter account, some of the stuff with just like the team page stuff feels very mundane, very cut and dry, very copy and paste style, but I am often irritated by what is considered quote unquote in-game access in NFL, NBA, and all these other leagues where you think you're getting access to coaches or players, and they're just talking about nonsense and they're saying nothing. Like the in-game access that we're getting with some of these teams, and it started with the first time it really stuck out to me was the game-winning pass from Kyle Sloter to Jonathan Adams. We got to see that whole clip of Noah Mazzoni and Larry Fedora, and they're cussing, and they're it's chaotic and hectic. Like we're actually getting good in-game access, and we're actually getting like good sound bites, and coaches and players are saying things. They're not willing to, they're not holding back. We're getting some kind of expletive laden celebrations after touchdowns and big sacks and stuff like that. Like that stuff is stuff that I think that they should embrace. And like people that think, the USFL, there's no way that could entertain me. If you're not entertained by the football product itself, you can be entertained by some of the additions that they've made to the broadcast, and like getting legitimate access to play callers and quarterbacks and other players on the field has been one of the things that I've been most impressed by, and one of the reasons why I'm excited to turn on my TV to watch these games each week.
But this was the point we were getting at when we were off recording, is So that tells me that there are people involved that know, like, this is what football people care about, right? This is what football fans care about. But so much of this league is anti, like, how to build a football league and, like, engage with the diehards and engage with the sports base. So that is where there is a disconnect to me. It's because, like, you're telling me, like, for this whole drive, we're not going to have any commentators. We're just going to let the play on the field. Like, this is what every football fan wants, right? Like, inside all this stuff. But then, like, we're releasing roster reports at 2 a.m. and we're not, updating the thing. And the website doesn't have all the right time zones for the games, or like, there's just little stuff along the line that's where the disconnect is to me. It's because part of it, like, so I understand there are people that get what football fans want, but there is a disconnect with what the rest of the league is doing when it comes to that.
And I think that they could do so much more to engage and connect with your style of audience that just loves spring football, loves alternate football, and fans like that just want to have a different product to watch. Maybe we're, not as engaged with the NFL or not as engaged with college football, or just want to have a new rooting interest. And then people like me who, are mostly in this for the sports betting, mostly in this for daily fantasy and things like that, because it's part of my job, but also want to enjoy the league from a viewership perspective as well. Things that they could just do so much easier in terms of, providing data, providing roster reports in a timely manner. As you mentioned, having a paid reporter there to report on some stuff that would be important for fantasy. We've gone weeks without knowing who the starting quarterback was or what the quarterback split in terms of snap rate would be. Like, if they just did a little bit to embrace that, and I'm not saying they need to come out and say, hey, Jamar Smith is going to play 2 series and then Alex Magoo is going to play the next 2. I don't need that information, but like, not knowing who the starting quarterback is going into a game. Just imagine if you were betting on an NFL game and there wasn't an Adam Schefter out there to tell you, hey, here's who is going to be the starter for the Patriots in week 3, right? Like, we kind of need some of that information as an audience that is rabid for sports betting and for daily fantasy. And I think that the viewership numbers for them, as an organization, would be even better if they embraced us a little bit more. So, those are some of the things that I've been impressed by, and some of the things B that I would just love to see them do a little bit more of as, we go into year 2, hopefully, and see them just kind of embrace this contingent of degenerates like myself who just want to bet and want to play fantasy.
Well, and I just think that their time could be better spent if we have a finite amount of time and a finite amount of resources, and like, okay, we're going to bend over backwards still for like the local Birmingham Fox station to like, let's get them out to the practice squad. Like, I think that, having Brian Woods, it was like a couple weeks before the season, like, we're going to have him on the Detroit Free Press to like promote, USFL, like Michigan stuff. And I'm like, the distance that would travel in our circles and being able to populate that versus like whoever the hell is reading that newspaper that you think is going to turn on the USFL game in 2 weeks. Like, I just think time could be better spent and resources. And it's always curious to me, like, who we're feeding stuff to and who we're bending over backwards for and who we're not. And like, it's not a big world in terms of these things that you would need to hit. But I think the distance you would get out of that would be a lot better than like another weather guy in Birmingham doing a hit from the station or whatever.
Yeah, and that's one of the things from the very beginning that seemed like a huge miss by the league. And maybe this was the only way that they could do it. Again, you probably know better on kind of the ins and outs of this stuff than certainly than I do. But just having all of these teams centrally located, it's tough to get we've seen Birmingham be the team that everyone's excited about because the Birmingham team is the local team. B, they've been really good. But everyone gets excited about Birmingham when you get actual attendance numbers is for the Birmingham games. I think a big miss by the league was not having these teams located in their cities, and maybe it just probably wasn't even possible given the financial structure and time frame and things like that. But I hope, going forward, like, get local fan engagement. Also, if you have a team in New Jersey, maybe you've got a local New Jersey reporter who, maybe just graduated college and wants to report on this stuff, and maybe you get more accurate information from that perspective. But when you've just got the team in Birmingham kind of being the central focus of most of the reporting, it makes it difficult to get information and news out for, some of these other teams.
Well, and they don't prioritize. I can't remember who I was talking to last week, and they're like, they don't, like, if you're in Birmingham, like, you can only cover the Stallions. Like, they won't even let you like set up that stuff. I agree doing it outside of the hub was not possible. Darrell Johnston had an interview last week where he said, like, we didn't expect the non-Birmingham games to be this bad. Like, and I don't think there's any to get I mean, I've hammered and everyone's hammered the hub thing forever. And, I get that it wasn't feasible to do it, but I don't think in any modicum of a thread in their brain, they thought that there would be 15 people at the non-Birmingham games. I just didn't think that was possible.
It's been a stark contrast, and it's been tough to, it does lessen the viewing experience. And I don't know if you feel the same way about this, but like just seeing completely empty stands puts a little bit of a damper on the overall viewing experience. I just wish that they could get more people in there to fill it up a little bit. But, that's been one of the things that they're going to have to get creative to get around that issue, because I think that's an easy thing for USFL naysayers, for alt football league naysayers to just point to, oh my God, the stands are empty. It looks like my son's high school game, and it does make for a very different viewing experience when you're used to 80,000 screaming fans in the stands.
I can't do it. I couldn't do it with WWE when they did the training center stuff during COVID. Like, I watched, they did WrestleMania there with no fan. Like, I couldn't do it then. I can't do it now. It's really a struggle for me. Even with the CFL games, like some of the Toronto is piss poor as their attendance is sometimes last year. Like, having that energy there, it's really, really hard. It takes me out of it every time. It's a struggle for me, and this is what I do for passion, is covering all this stuff. It's a struggle.
Right, exactly. Yeah, I think about it as someone who lives in a football town. I live in Lincoln, Nebraska, and the joke often goes that Memorial Stadium becomes the third largest city in Nebraska on Husker game days. I wonder if, like, something, a major football town, there's nothing to do in Lincoln, Nebraska. I can't imagine there's a whole lot to do in Birmingham, Alabama either. But it's amazing that you can't get more. I'm a parent with young kids. You can't get more parents with young kids out there to go, have just a kind of an experience. But the fact that they can't fill the stands at all has been tough to watch.
Yeah, like I said, 10 weeks, even the Birmingham games, 10 weeks in a row, home games. No one has, like, even in the Seahawks, we don't have 10 weeks of home games every single week. Like, I mean, like I said, sometimes you just got shit to do. Like, I got to go to the store. Like, I can't, because I see on Twitter, like, oh God, maybe they got stuff to do. I got groceries. I got to do laundry. Like, I can't be going down here to Protective Stadium for 6 hours to watch football games.
And they started on Easter weekend, right? So you start with this baseline of no fans in the stands because everyone has something to do on Easter weekend, right? So when you start at 0, it's tough to get people excited to then come back for week 2, week 3. Maybe if they had started at a higher rate, you see it on TV, you see that there's a fun, the XFL viewer attendance numbers were a lot better. I remember, like, the beer snake stuff with the XFL and stuff like that. It actually looked like a fun experience to be at an XFL game.
Yeah, it was hit or miss. I mean, like, LA was really bad. Tampa was really bad. DC was good. Seattle was good. St. Louis was good. But, like I said, even having 10,000, I think this had to be worse than anything they ever expected. I mean, doomsday scenario to have 200 people. I mean, they're like, this weekend we're giving out hats for military people, which is great, veterans, or whatever, for Memorial Day. But it was like the beach towels last week. I'm like, not one extra person is going, like, that is cost that I would not give. Like, I don't care if that's $100 or $1,000 you're spending. Not one extra person is going to the game because there's beach towels. Like, That's great that you went. Like, and I saw someone post a photo and they're like, oh, this is a really good beach towel. But you did not get one extra person for that. You would have had more time coming on the Markcast to talk, I'm sorry, than giving out beach towels of that. I think it would have been equal to or the same promotion to do that way.
Could not agree more. Yeah, you're not getting more butts in the seats because you're giving out a beach towel or a hat, unfortunately.
All right. Well, I'll let you go now. I just saw NFL is launching NFL Plus in July. So we want to talk about more streaming and content and in-depth analysis. There you go. I mean, so, this is how we are going with, giving, USFL is leading that way too with all that. But that is interesting. I just saw Front Office Sports tweeted by Ben Fisher, friend of the show with Sports Business Journal, that NFL Plus is launching in July. I want to be able to watch NFL games on my phone. I'm a Washington football fan, or now I guess the Commanders fan. This would be I would very much appreciate that.
Oh, I have to leave you on this. I apologize that you're a Commanders fan. I hope they do better by you as fans in the coming year. Let's hope for a little bit of a turnaround for you. You've been in for a rough stretch here with your football team.
I appreciate that. Yeah, I think Carson Wentz is going to be the one that talking about failing up. Carson Wentz. Oh, there you go.
See, I'll say a little prayer for your football fandom tonight because I dealt with Carson Wentz as a Colts fan last year. I don't think it's going to get any better for you, unfortunately, this year. But maybe you'll be in a good enough draft position to get somebody like C.J. Stroud or somebody else who can take your organization to the next level in the years to come.
Well, no, we have Sam Howell, right? We have the chicken tender eater himself, right? No meat, no steak. I don't eat beef. I just eat chicken tenders. I think he is going to be the godsend for our team. So
we can only hope.
Want to thank all of our guests for taking the time to come on today. Jim Mullin, pitch hitting here late at night, coming on to dissect the breaking news of the CBA agreement. Darrell Davis for coming on, as always. Cody Main and Eric Eager. Really appreciate everyone taking the time to come on today. Next week should be a really eventful week. We have the rumored June 1st, announcement of the XFL cities and all that stuff. Trying to figure out maybe what time of day that's going to be so we can schedule some sort of live stream. But when all that news comes out, I would look towards a YouTube channel trying to put that together, but we'll have something for you regardless on Wednesday when all that comes down. I have a big guest coming up on Friday next week as well, talking XFL. You'll be really excited when you hear this. This is someone that maybe you wouldn't expect. I tweeted this week the Pam from The Office, like, ooh, nice, when you find out the guest. So it should be a really good show, maybe a double dose next week with the stuff on Wednesday and then on Friday. Listener Max has been bugging me all week to let you guys know. Redbird Capital, owner of the XFL, all that, they're purchasing like an 80% stake in AC Milan, the soccer club. Jerry Cardinal is over in Europe right now, kind of making all of that known. Max just wanted to make sure I let you know that. He's been bugging me, but how they right on part of Fenway Sports and all that, trying to elevate that brand up like Liverpool over there. But that's a big, stake, a big expenditure from the XFL doing that, kind of raising, or Redbird expenditure from Redbird, kind of raising their market share and visibility that way. So really excited to see that, right? Redbird's taking over the world. First stop XFL, next stop, who knows? Sky's the limit. But Max has been bugging me, so we got that on. Before we get out of here, I just had a little read, just a little PSA from your friend Reed here, spend a lot of time on all this stuff. A lot has been made this week. We talked last week, the ESPN TV deal, for the XFL with Disney and all that stuff. Been a lot of chatter this week about rumored numbers with the XFL. How much are they getting, per year and all that stuff. I've tweeted, I've talked about it on Twitter, but obviously not everybody is on Twitter. So I wanted to kind of address it on here. Nothing right now is publicly known about any of the terms of the XFL, ESPN, Disney TV deal. Might never be known. Maybe it'll come out, but, when you see reports out there from, other Twitter accounts, other shows and things, I always say, go to xflnewshub.com. There's literally, and we can talk newsroom. I mean, I'm not, obviously we're sided with Newshub, but there's literally 2 XFL news sites in the world. So if you ever see anything and you're like, go to XFL News Hub. If Mark has an article up about it, if Stefan over at Newsroom, has a story up on it, okay. But if you're seeing these things on Twitter and you go to XFL News Hub or Newsroom and there's nothing about it, just think about that. There's literally 2 XFL news sites in the history of the world that cover this as thoroughly as Mark does. And, we all do at XFL News Hub, all the writers, Mike and Jay and everybody, Matt Lyons, Matt Nakashima, Anthony, I hope I'm not forgetting Sam. Now I'm going to get in trouble. Andrew Murray, but all the guys over at XFL News Hub. If you see stuff on Twitter and it's not on XFL News Hub, there's probably a reason for it. So just keep that in mind. Always, my DMs are always open. If you see anything, hey, is this real? Is this not? Because, we're getting to that point where people want to, share fake news, get more likes, right? Get more traction that way. I've always tried to kind of exhibit my journalism background on here. I went to school for journalism, worked in news for many, many years. So I always try to run this stuff through a filter, but check with me on Twitter if you see stuff. Like I said, just go to XFL News Hub. If Mark Perry doesn't have an article about it, there's probably a reason why. So that is your Read Rant today. Really appreciate everyone checking out the show. Crazy world here. XFL stuff next week. Getting into the end game of the USFL season, and I'm really excited for the CFL. I think I'm going to try to plan a live either pre or post game show for that kickoff game. I'm looking here at my calendar on the 9th, right? This Montreal at Calgary on that Thursday. So maybe we'll do some sort of special pregame show like we did last year. Remember, we had Darren Bombing on the show and my microphone didn't work, and or that was the other live show. I think we had Jim Mullin on because that was it. We had Jim Mullin on the pregame show for the CFL kickoff last time. Anyway, thank you guys all so much again. Please like and subscribe. Lots of work going into all this. All of our guests checking out the show. So take care, stay safe, and enjoy some football. Thanks.